Okay, thanks very much, and good morning, everybody. Or it's good morning here in London. It may very well be good afternoon wherever you are. But thank you all very much for giving up your time today to come to our presentation on our small grant scheme for 2025. My name's Ross Gill. I'm the chairman of the BEARR Trust, and I've got some colleagues from BEARR here as well. Valdone, who will probably be your contact when you email info@bearr.org, and also Anna, who will be answering some of the questions in the chat as we go through. So hello and welcome. What I want to talk about today is a bit of an introduction to the small grant scheme that we are offering this year, and also to give some tips on how to write a strong application, and to say a bit about how we assess the applications when we receive them. I'll be speaking in English during the course of this presentation, but we do have translation into Ukrainian and into Russian. So if you want to access this presentation in either of those languages, if you click on the globe button at the bottom of the screen, and then you should be able to hear everything that I'm saying in either Ukrainian or Russian. So I hope that works. If you have any problems in hearing or in accessing the translation, if you want to put that in the chat, somebody will respond to you. During the course of the presentation, any questions that you have, please do put them into the chat, and Anna will try and answer them as we go along. You can ask questions in English, Russian, or Ukrainian, and we'll answer them in the language that you've put the question in. So any questions you've got, just ask as we go along, and we'll make sure we answer them. We will be putting a copy of this presentation on our website afterwards. We should have some time at the end of the presentation if there are any other questions that you want to ask. We won't record that section, or we won't put that section of the recording on the website, so that you're free to ask any questions that you want. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. So a little bit about the small grant scheme. And the BEARR Trust has been running a small grant scheme for several years now, since 2006. For those of you who may not be familiar with the BEARR Trust, and I know that some of you will possibly have received grants from us in the past, or may have applied to us before, but for those of you who don't know about BEARR, we're a UK-based charity. We've been operating since the start of the 1990s in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, supporting health and welfare within community grassroots organisations over that time. In 2006, we started a small grant scheme, and the purpose of that is to provide small amounts of money to small civil society organisations, community organisations, essentially, that are working together in health and social welfare in the community. Since that time, we've run our small grant scheme every year. So we've funded a large number of projects over that time. Every year we focus on a different theme. So if the theme that we've chosen this year doesn't fit with the sort of project that you want to take forward, there may still be an opportunity for you to apply next year, because the theme might be a bit different then. So we do vary the theme every year. And we try and vary the theme depending on feedback that we've had from our partners on the ground, and from other things that are happening more broadly. Last year, we received 82 applications to the small grant scheme. We awarded 16 grants that came out of that. So you can see from that we do have quite a lot more applications than we are able to give in grants. If we had more money, we would issue more grants. So we want to support as many groups as possible. We want to support those projects that meet the criteria. Unfortunately, we're a small organisation. All of our money comes from charitable donations as well. So there's only ever so much that we can do. But if we had more, we would do more. But that just gives you an idea of the scale of the number of applications that we get. So this year, in 2025, we have two strands of our small grant scheme. A first strand that's focused on joint projects that support the integration and inclusion of vulnerable people into their local community. And that's open to organisations in the countries that are listed there. And we have a second strand, strand B, for activities to support the welfare of staff and volunteers and for organisational resilience, which is specifically to Ukraine. I'll explain a bit about both of those strands and what we're looking for from your applications in the next few slides. But for both of those strands, for all applications, the closing date is Friday, the 31st of January, at the end of the day, so 1 minute to midnight, London time. So there's a couple of weeks, or 3 weeks still to go. So there's plenty of time to get your applications in. But that closing, we do have to stick to that closing date. So make sure you bear that in mind. So I'll talk first about Strand A, projects to support integration and inclusion of vulnerable people into their local community. If you want to apply for this strand, there is a maximum grant of £4,000. So this is the larger of the two. And I'll say a bit about what we're looking for from applications in that strand. So to start off with, what are we interested in funding? We're interested in supporting organisations that can work together over the longer term and which can extend collaboration between different organisations. So part of the reason that we talk about joint projects is that one of our aims at BEARR is to encourage that joint working, collaboration between different groups, sharing ideas, maybe learning from each other and seeing how things can be scaled up. So that's why we ask for more than one partner in proposing a project in Strand A. We're interested in finding out about projects that other people can learn from. So it might be that there's a project that you want to take forward, which potentially could be quite innovative. We can provide a small amount of funding to see if it works, see what you learn from it. And then maybe others, either other organisations within the local community, elsewhere in the country, and so on, can learn from it, perhaps replicate it, and so on. So we're interested in that and how we can build wider networks more broadly. And then thirdly, what we're really looking for, and it's the core of the theme, are projects that are about integration and inclusion of vulnerable people in their local communities. And we've got quite a broad definition of that. So what do we mean by vulnerable people? And we have a definition that we've put there in the box in orange. And you'll see there that it's really quite broad. So we define vulnerability quite widely. So we're including within that children, women and girls, people with physical and mental disabilities, people who are marginalised for a whole range of reasons, their economic position, etc., experience of conflict, displacement, geographical location. So our definition of vulnerability is very much context specific. So some of those categories in there, age, gender, and so on, doesn't necessarily mean to say that people are vulnerable, of course, but in certain contexts, they might be. So what we're really interested in is your understanding of your beneficiaries. What do you mean by vulnerability? How do you define the specific group that you want to support? And how do you recognise them as needing specific support? We recognise that the definition of vulnerable could be very different in parts of Ukraine from what it might be in parts of Kazakhstan, and that will be different from how it might be in parts of the UK and so on. So we're interested in what that means to you and how you define that. When you set out your proposal to us, please do define the group that your project aims to support. So we're interested in understanding what group you particularly want your project to focus on, what you think those problems are that particular group faces, and that might be based on your own organisation's direct experience in the community. It might be based on wider data and evidence that you have, but be clear about what it is that you're trying to address. And then explain what your project's going to do to address those problems. So why is this project going to help that particular group? We're also focused within this call on integration and inclusion in local communities. And again, there could be a range of ways in which we might interpret integration and inclusion. That might mean projects that help people to access services better. It might be projects that help people to access employment or access training, because for reasons of their disability or other conditions, they might find it otherwise difficult to access some of those things. You might want to bring forward projects that are about helping people to have a stronger voice in their community. So maybe projects that enable the people that particularly benefit from the project actually having a stronger voice in how that project's run, or how services for people with disabilities are delivered in your community. Some projects might be about reducing the isolation of those groups and bringing people together, either with people with similar challenges or the wider community more broadly. And some projects might be about changing the way in which services are delivered. So it might not just be about changing how people can access those services, it might be about changing the way in which things are done in the first place so that people are better served. So there's quite a wide range in which projects might support integration and inclusion, and we're open to different ideas and different interpretations of that depending on your knowledge. We're especially interested in this call in work in the local community at local level. So we're probably not so focused in this call on projects which might be about changing perceptions nationally, or doing work with national government to change the way in which national strategies and processes are being done. That's not really what we're focused on. We're more focused on what's happening on the ground in the community, what difference can you make locally, and what can we learn from that. But we're really interested in your understanding of your communities and what needs to happen. We do set out some criteria for applications to the small grant scheme. The criteria are all set out in detail on the website and in the guidance notes that you can download there. Please do follow the guidance as it's set out. Use the application forms that are provided on the website. It's really helpful if you follow the guidance and use the application forms, because we've got quite a small team. We get quite a lot of applications. We need to go through each of them, and we do go through all of the applications that we receive, and we try and spend as much time as we can considering all of them. So if they're all sort of in the same format, if they're all using the same guidance, the same templates, that makes it easier for us, so then we can compare one project with another. So please do use the guidance, use the application forms. Make sure that you address the theme, so that theme of joint projects that support the integration and inclusion of vulnerable people in the community. If your project doesn't really address that theme, don't try and force it so that it does, because we will get quite a lot of applications. And it's likely that if your project doesn't really meet the theme, then it probably won't be successful. So if you don't fit with us this time, you're probably better off waiting until next year, seeing if the theme next year fits with your project better, because that's what we're really focused on, and we probably will get, hopefully we'll get some high quality applications that meet the theme. We do want your project to be a joint project between 2 or more organisations. That might be another organisation or a couple of organisations that you've worked with for a long time. You might have an established relationship, and that's great. But it might not be. It might be that you're building a new partnership. Maybe you're working for the first time with somebody else, and you're seeing what that other organisation can bring as well, and how you can work together, and you're trying to work it out through this project. That's great. We're very happy to receive applications from new partnerships. And maybe you're an established organisation, your partner is a brand new organisation with less experience, and through this project they can learn from you. That would be great. We're very happy to see that. The maximum amount that we can give is £4,000. That's not a huge amount of money, and we recognise that. So we're really looking for organisations that will really benefit from funding at that scale. If your organisation receives quite a lot of funding from various different sources, and this would only be a very small amount relative to the overall amounts that you have, then we're probably not for you, because you can probably better access larger sources of funding. We're more focused on smaller organisations where that £4,000 will make a difference, and be really valuable to you. We can't offer more than that, unfortunately, because our funding's limited. So please don't apply for more than £4,000, because we would only be able to give you that £4,000 anyway. Make sure that your application is only 5 pages long. So that's 4 pages for the actual application, and then a 1 page for the budget, which you can either do as a Word page or an Excel sheet if you prefer. Quite a lot of the time, organisations have lots more information that they would like to give us, and it would be great if we had the time to read it all, but because we've got limited time, we want to make sure that we can really focus on what you're going to do, what the challenges are, and so on. So try and stick to that 5-page limit. If you want, though, you can put hyperlinks to other things on the web in the application. That's fine. Please do let us know if you've got a website or a Facebook page or something like that. That's really helpful, because we will look at that. And then please make sure that you include some co-funding within your application. So our contribution from BEARR is only ever going to be 50% of total project costs at most. And I'll explain a little bit about that funding mechanism. So we can only fund up to half of total project costs. The reason that we do that is we want to encourage projects to attract funding from elsewhere, and we want to make sure that somebody else has a stake in the project, and that somebody else might be another funder, or it might be you yourselves. So that's why we ask for additional funding. So, for example, if your total project cost was £5,000, we could contribute up to half of that. So we could contribute £2,500. Maybe another funder contributes 1,500, and maybe you put in £1,000 from your own resources. So that's what a funding mix might look like. But there could be various ways in configuring that. Your match funding into the project, your other 50%, doesn't necessarily need to be money in cash from another funder. So it could include what we call in-kind costs, which might be the way in which you value the time of your volunteers that are put to it, or it may be your use of office equipment which you already have, and so on. So you can be quite creative around that. The key thing that we want to make sure is that you or another funder have a real stake in the project, but how that's configured, we can be quite flexible about. We expect normally that most of the money that we that we give you will be spent on things that are about running the project. So they're about sort of day-to-day things like paying for the costs of those people that are working on the project, maybe paying for refreshments, paying for stationery and things like that sort of stuff. Sometimes people might want some technical goods and so on. They might want to buy a bit of software. They might need a laptop or an iPad or something like that to support the project. You can include that, but we wouldn't want that to be more than 20% of the total BEARR grant, because this isn't fundamentally a capital fund, if you like. It's a fund to deliver those projects. So make sure that doesn't exceed 20%. All of this, the rules about funding and so on, these are all set out in the guidance notes that are on the website. So make sure you familiarise yourself with those. So what are we looking for when we assess bids, and when we go through all of these? What are we what are we trying to find? Firstly, we're looking for applications that clearly support the theme, so clearly support integration and inclusion of vulnerable people in the community. We're looking for clarity, for clarity about what you're going to do. So specifically, what is the project actually going to do in concrete terms, and try and be really specific about that. Be really specific about who is going to benefit. So how many people, where, from what group, really. And be clear about why you're doing it, as I was saying before. What difference do you think this project is going to make, and how do you explain that? We want evidence that you're working together as two or more organisations, and we want to sort of understand why you're working together as two or more organisations. So what do the two partners bring together? How can that support collaboration more broadly? As I said before, we want to focus on where our contribution can make a real difference. So we're really focused on smaller organisations, newer organisations, and so on. So that's what we're really interested in. If you've received funds from us in the past, you're still very welcome to apply. We quite often provide a grant to organisations that we've provided a grant to before. So the fact that you've had support from us before, that doesn't jeopardise your application at all. We'll be very happy to receive another application. Equally, we're very happy to receive applications from people that we have never had anything to do with at all, and that we don't know. So either way, if you have a good project, submit it to us and we'll consider it on its merits. We're interested in projects that are trying to do something that's new or imaginative, maybe trying out something original, working with a new partner, perhaps working with a new group, trying to extend what you've been doing in one place to another place, that sort of thing. So if there is something new or original about your project, we're really interested to hear from it. There might be circumstances, though, where maybe your project's not so new, but it has other real strengths. So the fact, just because you're not doing something new or you're not doing something for the first time doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply. We're interested in originality, but it's not the only thing we're interested in. Make sure you've got other funding, as we said before, and that the BEARR's funding is only up to half of total project costs. And then make sure that you can deliver your project within a reasonable time frame. I'll say a little bit more about timescales at the end, but we would normally expect projects to be delivered. It says there 6 months. It's sort of about that, and it might take a while between when you apply and when you get the grant. I'll say a bit about that at the end, but we're talking about projects that can be delivered in the sort of short term, really, rather than over a period of years. Finally, when we assess bids, what we're really interested in is the project itself. So we see lots of applications, and we try and dig out what the really interesting thing about the project is, and how it really meets those criteria on that page. Don't worry if you haven't got loads of experience of bid writing. Although we ask for applications to be in English, don't worry if your English isn't perfect. If you write your application in Ukrainian or Russian or another language, and then you translate it using Google Translate or something like that, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry about that. We're more interested in the project, not exactly what words you use and so on. That's the first strand, strand A of the applications. I'll come on now and say a bit about strand B, activities to support the welfare of staff and volunteers and organisational resilience, which is only open to Ukraine and only open to organisations that have received funds from us before. And it's a smaller pot, it's a smaller grant of just £1,000 maximum grant. We've run strand B for a couple of years now. As I say, it's restricted to organisations that have previously received funds from us. That might be that you are an organisation in Ukraine that has received small grant scheme money from us, or it might be that you have received funds from our Ukraine appeal, which is a separate fund, which is ongoing and is continuously open for organisations supporting humanitarian assistance in Ukraine in the context of the war. Whichever of those different funding pots you've received funds from, if you've received funds from us and you are in Ukraine, you are able to apply to us, even if it was a couple of years ago that you received funds from us. If you're in Ukraine and you've previously received funds, we're willing to receive your application. The reason that we've set up Strand B is because we recognise that it's quite often very hard for small organisations to get funding to do things like support the welfare of their own staff, their own volunteers, their own resilience. Quite often, funders will want to fund a specific project. They'll want to fund things that lead to definable outputs, but there isn't the money to help the kind of people that are really keeping it all going. But all of that's really vital for their long-term resilience. So what we've tried to do is design a fund that can pay for some of that and help small organisations do some of that. So the kind of things that we might support might be things like organising an away day, which could help your staff and your volunteers and so on to plan ahead, think about what your strategy is, think about what you might do next. We could help fund some work that might enable you to develop new collaborations with other organisations or with local government organisations and so on. Sometimes developing new collaborations doesn't result in outputs, it doesn't result in a project as such, but you need to have those discussions, you need to do some thinking, some strategy development and so on, and we could pay for that. You might want to do things that are about improving the way your organisation works. Maybe you've grown a bit in the past couple of years and actually you need a better way of recording all of your information, recording what you're doing and things like that. And perhaps we could pay to help for some of that. And what some people have done in the past couple of years is organise some events, some away days and things like that, which can help volunteers and staff recover from the pressure and the stress of having to deal with things day to day. And we're happy to fund that as well. So you can be quite imaginative about what activities we can fund. We're quite flexible, really, but it's those kind of things to help your organisation. We can only provide £1,000 in Strand B, so it is really quite small. Again, the same things apply as in Strand A. We're mostly focused on small organisations. We want to know where we will make a big difference, so bear that in mind. However, you can use a Strand B grant to fund 100% of the costs. So we recognise that you may very well not have any other funding to chip into this. We can fund it all. If you do have some match funding, some of your own funding or whatever, then please do put that in the application form, because that's good to see and we'd take that into account. But you can apply for £1,000 without anything else. So what we're really interested in here is thinking about what are the challenges that you face as an organisation? What are the actions that will support your resilience? Across both strands, but especially Strand A, where you're delivering direct projects that are supporting vulnerable people, we want to make sure that those people that you're supporting and everybody that's involved in the project is protected from harm and is safe within this. As an organisation, the BEARR Trust has a safeguarding policy that's available on our website. Please read through it. It's only a couple of pages, but make sure that you familiarise yourself with it and what it means. And what it's really about is trying to make sure that through the work we do and the grants we give, that we deliver against that statement that is in the box at the top of the slide, that everyone has the right to be protected from all forms of harm, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And sometimes in projects, things go wrong through oversight or through a lack of scrutiny and things like that. So we want to make sure that people have plans in place and systems in place that can protect against that. We don't ask you, as part of your application to the small grant scheme, to tell us a lot about what you need to do about that. So it's not one of the questions on the form. But think about the measures that you can take to protect people from harm, where you've got policies in place. Tell us about them. And as it says there, we're interested in making sure that the activities we fund are safe and understanding what that means in the context of your project. I'll say a little bit about what happens next, and then I'll just cover off some of these final points. The closing date, as we've said, is the 31st of January. We're quite strict about that closing date because we will have lots of applications by that point. And once the closing date has passed, we get on quite quickly to making sure that we tabulate all of the applications and we look at them and we start the process of assessment. So we won't consider late applications. So please make sure that you get your application in by the deadline. Otherwise, we won't be able to consider it, and it will be a waste of your effort. We'll consider applications in February, March, and into April. We would hope to be able to let successful applicants know that they've received, that we've issued them with a grant in April, maybe into May, and then we will issue successful applicants with a grant agreement, which is very short. It's a couple of pages. It's not a complicated legal agreement. It's just a letter that sets out what we expect and what you're going to do. So we will send you that. Ordinarily, we don't vary the grant agreement because we don't have the capacity to enter into complex different agreements with different people. So we have a standard agreement which we'd ask you to sign, and unless there's very unusual circumstances, we wouldn't vary that. But hopefully it's quite straightforward. We will then issue the funding to you. As an organisation, because we're small and we are dependent on grants, we are dependent on a significant source of funding, which we will receive at some point in 2025. And once we receive that funding, we will then be able to issue grants to you. We don't always know when we will get that money. So it might arrive to us in April, or we might not get it till July or August. We don't know because it tends to vary. We will get it because it's guaranteed. So if we approve your application, we will definitely fund you, but there might be a timing issue as to when we can pay the money. So it may be, and it was the case last year, that we weren't able to send out payment until the start of September, which is quite a long way off. So please bear that in mind. If you're proposing doing something that's very season specific, bear in mind that actually it could be a bit later and you might not be able to deliver the project until the autumn. When we pay the money to you, although we ask you to set out your budget in pounds, because that's the currency that we're working in, we will pay you, we could pay you in a variety of currencies. Normally, we pay funds in either US dollars or in euros, sometimes in British pounds, sometimes other currencies. You can tell us that when you send back your grant agreement, what currency you prefer to be paid in, and we will try and make that work. If you're unsuccessful, then we will let you know that you're unsuccessful at the same time that we let successful applicants know. So that will be sort of April time. Unfortunately, because we're quite a small team and we don't have that much capacity, we're not able to give feedback on unsuccessful applications. We're sorry about that. If we had more people and we were able to do that, then we would, because I can see that having feedback on unsuccessful applications can sometimes be really useful for the future, but we're just not able to, unfortunately. Probably the best way of thinking about feedback is to think about some of the tips that have been in this presentation and that are on the website, and think about how projects best meet some of those things. So finally, we very much want projects to succeed. So when we appraise projects, we're not looking for reasons to rule people out. We're not looking for them to meet very specific technical things that we haven't told you about. There's no trick questions. We want to approve as many as we can, and we want you to succeed. We want to learn from the projects that we fund as well. In 2026, hopefully we'll be running another round of the small grant scheme, and every time we learn from what we did before and the partnerships that we had then. So when you deliver your project, we'll ask you to send us a report on your project and explain what you've done. When we do that, what we're most interested in is what worked, why it worked, what you learnt from it. So we're more interested in that really than whether you engaged with 25 people as opposed to 27. It's more interesting for us to really understand the learning, what you've learned from it. As we said, please follow the guidance, but it's the quality of the projects we're really interested in. Please don't be discouraged if we can't fund you this time. As you'll have seen from the figures, we get more applications than we can support. Sometimes there's a very difficult decision between a project and another project that might actually one might be almost as good as the other, but we can only fund one of them. So please don't be discouraged. Please apply again. We welcome future applications. And finally, we're interested in your feedback as well. So whether you're successful or not, if you have feedback on the process, if there are things that you thought could have been made clearer, or could have been done differently, or whatever, please tell us that, because we can. If we don't know, then we can't improve. So we're keen to learn from you and to learn how we can do this better and change it over time. So that's a bit of a run through of the small grant scheme. All the forms and the guidance are there on the website. If you have any questions, and I can't see the chat because all I can see is this presentation, so that you probably put lots of questions in there, and Anna's probably answered loads of them. But if you have any questions, obviously put them in the chat now, or after the event, you can email us at info@bearr.org. You're welcome to put your questions in English, Ukrainian, or Russian and receive an answer in the same language. So any questions, please let us know. And good luck, and we look forward to receiving applications from you, and hopefully we'll be able to support as many of them as we can, and we'll have some really interesting and really worthwhile and valuable projects later on this year.